A gunshot echoed through Devil's Cut just as the stranger's hand pulled her into the shadows. "Hush now," the cowboy whispered. "You're safe with me." But when she looked into his eyes, she couldn't decide which was more dangerous, the men hunting her or the man hiding her. The stagecoach lurched hard against the canyon wall as Clara clutched the leather satchel that half the territory seemed willing to kill for. Dust filled the air. Horses screamed. Hidden inside an abandoned line shack, she drove a steel hatpin into the arm of the towering rancher who had just pulled her close. He didn't fight back. Instead, he laid his rifle on the floor and stepped aside, leaving the next choice entirely to her. Outside, boots crunched over loose stone, drawing nearer with every breath. "Before we ride farther, tell me, would you have trusted him or run?" The stagecoach left the little rail stop outside Tucson just after sunrise, its wheels rattling over the hard-packed road as the desert slowly gave way to rocky hills. Clara Hayes sat beside the window with a worn leather satchel resting across her lap. Her gloved hand never left its strap. Most passengers carried blankets, family letters, or small parcels wrapped in brown paper. Clara carried deeds, survey maps, witness statements, receipts with faded ink. Enough paper to decide whether 17 families would still own their land by spring. Ben Holloway, the gray-haired driver, glanced back once as the coach climbed toward Devil's Cut. "We'll be crossing the pass before dark," he called, "if the weather stays kind." Clara nodded without answering. She unfolded a small survey map only long enough to compare two creek lines. Something still bothered her. The newer boundary did not match the older measurements. Someone had moved more than fence posts. Someone had moved history. She slipped the papers back inside her satchel, but not before sliding several thin sheets beneath the lining of her coat. If anyone stole the bag, they would not find everything. By late afternoon, the red walls of Devil's Cut rose on both sides of the road. The canyon narrowed until the stagecoach barely fit between the stone cliffs. The horses grew restless. Ben eased the reins. "I don't like this stretch," he muttered. A shot cracked through the canyon. The lantern hanging beside the driver's seat exploded into sparks. The horses lunged. Another bullet struck the front wheel. The coach slammed sideways against a boulder. Wood groaned. One wheel lifted. Clara caught herself against the seat as luggage flew across the cabin. "Stay down!" Ben shouted. The horses screamed. The coach rolled onto its side. Dust swallowed everything. Clara forced the door open with both boots and crawled into the fading light. Behind her, Ben was trapped beneath the broken driver's bench, blood running from a cut above his eye. "Go!" he rasped. "Take the bag!" Two riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon, faces covered with dark bandanas. One pointed toward her. "The leather bag!" he shouted. "Leave it and walk away!" Not a word about money. Not a word about the mail. Only the satchel. Clara tightened her grip. She looked once toward Ben, then toward the narrow opening between two rocks. She ran. Loose gravel slid beneath her boots as she climbed into the shadows. Wind rushed through the canyon, carrying the smell of dust and gunpowder. Behind her came hoofbeats. Closer. She spotted an abandoned line shack tucked beneath a sandstone ledge and slipped inside. The room was barely large enough for a cot, a cracked water barrel, and an old saddle hanging from a peg. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. Outside, a horse stopped. Boots struck the ground. Someone was searching. She reached for the small revolver hidden beneath her coat. Before she could draw it, a broad hand covered her mouth. Another arm pulled her gently but firmly into the deepest corner of the shack. Her heart hammered. The stranger leaned close enough that she heard him breathe. "Hush now," he whispered. "You're safe with me." Clara drove the long steel pin from her hat into his forearm. The man released her instantly. He stepped back with both hands raised. Even in the dim light, she saw how enormous he was. Tall enough that his hat nearly brushed the ceiling beam. Broad shoulders, heavy work coat, a beard touched with dust. His gray eyes never left hers, but they carried no anger, only caution. Without speaking, he pointed toward a crack between two weathered boards. Clara looked. One rider had dismounted. He knelt outside, studying footprints in the dirt. The other circled slowly, rifle resting across his saddle. The giant cowboy bent, laid his own Winchester on the floor, then pushed it toward her with 2 fingers. He did not reach for another weapon. He simply waited. Clara kept her revolver trained on him. "You know them?" she whispered. He shook his head once. "You knew they'd come." Another slow shake. "I heard the first shot." Silence settled between them. Outside, one rider cursed. They couldn't have gone far. The cowboy glanced toward the rear wall. There was a narrow opening barely wide enough for one person. An old cattle trail. He pointed toward it. Clara looked back toward the road. "There's a man trapped under the coach." "I know. I'm going back. The road's covered. I won't leave him." The cowboy studied her for one long moment. Then he nodded once. He moved first. Not quickly, carefully. Using the rocks as cover, he led her along the hidden trail until it curved above the road. From there, they could see the wreck below. The riders had moved farther down the pass, searching the brush. The cowboy climbed down the slope with surprising quiet for a man his size. Together they reached the coach. He braced both hands beneath the broken frame. The timber groaned. Slowly, almost impossibly, he lifted one corner just high enough. Ben cried out. The cowboy did not rush. He lowered the weight an inch, adjusted his footing, lifted again. "Easy," he said. "You're coming out." Clara pulled Ben free, while the weight remained balanced on the cowboy's shoulders. Only after Ben was clear did the coach settle back onto the stones. No show of strength, no wasted movement, only control. Ben drifted in and out of consciousness as they loaded him onto the stranger's wagon hidden beyond the ridge. The cowboy secured the horses. Clara climbed aboard with her satchel still across her knees. Neither asked the other a single question. As twilight settled over Arizona territory, they followed a narrow ranch trail toward Iron Creek. The wind carried the scent of cedar and dry grass. The cowboy finally spoke. "My name's Luke Bennett." Clara nodded. "I'm Clara Hayes." Nothing more. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was honest. Hours later, lantern light glowed from a weathered ranch house standing alone beneath the dark hills. Luke carried Ben inside as though he weighed no more than a saddle blanket. When he cut away Ben's blood-soaked sleeve, something small slipped from the torn fabric and struck the wooden floor. Clara bent first. It was half of a brass deputy's badge, stamped with the words, "Coyote Ridge." She looked from the broken badge to the unconscious driver. Ben never opened his eyes. Near midnight, Clara woke in the small guest room to the sound of horses stopping outside. She eased the curtain aside. 3 riders waited beyond the ranch gate. Luke stood alone on the porch. He wore no coat despite the cold. One rider called out, "Sheriff Grant wants the woman." Luke did not touch the revolver on his hip. He stepped down from the porch and closed the distance by only a few feet. "Then Grant," he said quietly, "can come ask her himself." The 3 riders held their ground beyond the gate. Moonlight caught the brass stars pinned to 2 of their coats. The 3rd man wore no badge, only a dark vest and a red neckerchief pulled tight against the cold. Clara watched through the narrow gap in the curtain. Luke stood in the open yard without reaching for his gun. He looked larger beneath the pale sky, but there was nothing wild in the way he held himself. His arms hung loose at his sides, His voice never rose. "You've got no warrant," he said. The rider in front shifted in his saddle. "Sheriff says she's wanted for questioning." "Then he knows where to find her." The man with the red neckerchief leaned forward. "You always make simple things hard, Bennett." Luke glanced at him once. "No, I make men say what they mean." For several seconds, only the wind moved. It pushed dry grass along the fence and rattled the iron ring on the gate. At last, the lead rider pulled his horse around. "We'll be back." Luke opened the gate for them. That unsettled Clara more than if he had threatened them. He watched until the hoofbeats faded toward Coyote Ridge. Then he closed the gate, dropped the wooden bar into place, and walked back to the house. When he entered, Clara was waiting in the hallway with Ben's broken piece of badge in her palm. Luke stopped. "You knew they were deputies," she said. "I knew 2 of them." "And the third?" "Works cattle for Copper Crown." Clara studied his face. "You let them ride away." "They came without paper." "They may return with more men." "They may." His calm answer scraped at her nerves. Luke crossed to the kitchen, poured coffee from a blackened pot, and set a second cup on the table. He did not tell her to sit. He did not ask what she carried. Clara remained standing. "Why are you helping me?" Luke looked into his cup. "Because men who shoot coach wheels in a narrow pass aren't asking honest questions." Before dawn, Ben developed a fever. Earl Mason, the ranch hand who had worked Iron Creek for 20 years, brought clean water from the pump while Noah Briggs fed small pieces of wood into the stove. Earl moved with a stiff left leg, but his hands were steady. Noah was thin, 15 at most, with sleep-heavy eyes and a habit of looking toward Luke before making any decision. By sunrise, the ranch had settled into work. Clara had not. She found Luke in the yard tightening a cinch on a bay mare. "I need to reach the telegraph office." He handed her the reins. A food sack was already tied behind the saddle. A canteen hung from the horn. Clara looked at him. "You're letting me leave?" "The gate isn't locked." She mounted. Luke walked to the far side of the corral and pointed toward the road. Fresh hoof prints circled the ranch house, passed behind the barn, and disappeared into the dry wash. Then he showed her the signal wire running toward town. It had been cut cleanly at the first pole. "They're watching the open ground," he said. "No cover for 3 miles." Clara looked past the gate. The morning sun had turned the flats white and empty. Anyone riding there would be visible long before reaching the ridge. Luke stepped away from the mare. "Your choice." She sat motionless for a while. Then she climbed down, untied the food sack, and carried it back inside herself. She did not thank him. He did not expect her to. By mid-morning, Clara had taken over one end of the kitchen table. She spread out survey maps, freight receipts, and handwritten claims from families around Twin Willow. Beside them lay Iron Creek's livestock ledger, opened to a page showing cattle moved through the south pasture during the previous spring. Luke came in for water and stopped when he saw pencil marks crossing his ranch map. "You've marked the wagon trail. It runs beside the old creek boundary. It runs through my land. So does the disputed survey." Luke set his cup down. "Put the ledger back." Clara did not move. 17 families are being pushed off their property. Your freight records show Copper Crown wagons crossing this ranch at night. My records show feed deliveries, with no feed listed on the receipts. His eyes settled on hers. She did not look away. "You've lived beside this for years," Clara said. "How much did you choose not to see?" The room went still. Noah, entering with an armful of kindling, stopped at the door. Luke closed the ledger. "Words without proof get people buried." Clara folded her arms. "Silence lets the men holding the shovel decide where." A mare screamed from the barn. Luke was moving before the sound ended. The animal had gone into labor too early. She kicked against the stall boards, sides slick with sweat, while the foal lay turned wrong inside her. Luke entered the stall slowly. His broad body filled the narrow space, yet his hands settled gently along the mare's neck. Clara knelt behind the animal and rolled up her sleeves. "You know horses?" he asked. "I helped a veterinary surgeon in Kansas. Tell me what to do." No argument, no pride. She guided him with short instructions. "Hold here. Ease back. Wait." Each time the mare panicked, Luke loosened his grip rather than forcing her down. His shirt darkened with sweat. At one point, a hoof struck his hand against the stall rail, opening the skin across his knuckles. He did not pull away. Hours later, the foal slid onto the straw and took its first weak breath. Noah laughed aloud. Luke sat back against the wall, his injured hand resting in his lap. The newborn foal lifted its head, and Luke used one finger to clear straw from its nostrils. Clara watched him do it. The same hands that had lifted a wrecked coach now moved as though the small animal might break beneath them. That evening, she stitched Luke's wound at the kitchen table. He did not flinch when the needle passed through skin. But when Noah mentioned that 2 deputies had stopped at Mabel Bennett's relay station, asking questions about Clara, Luke's uninjured hand tightened around the table edge. Clara tied the final knot. "You can let go now," she said. Luke looked down. A pale mark showed where his fingers had pressed into the wood. He released it slowly. Near sunset, Mabel Bennett arrived in a dust-covered buggy without sending word ahead. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s, wearing a dark traveling dress and a hat pinned firmly against the wind. She entered carrying a jar of preserves and 3 letters. Her eyes found Clara. "Hayes," she repeated after the introduction. The jar stopped halfway to the table. "Did you have a brother named Daniel?" Clara's face did not change. "Yes." Mabel set the jar down carefully. "He came through my station 2 years ago. Thin fellow, brown coat, kept checking the road behind him." Clara's fingers closed around the back of a chair. "Was he alone?" Mabel shook her head. "He rode with Lewis Grant. Grant was still a deputy then." No one spoke. Outside, a loose shutter tapped against the wall. Daniel had been reported dead 3 days after leaving Coyote Ridge. "A horse accident," the letter had said. Clara walked to the barn and reached for a bridle hanging near the tack room. It slipped from her hand. She picked it up, dropped it again. Luke had followed, but he stopped several feet away. He bent, brushed the dirt from the leather, and placed it across the rail beside her. He did not touch her shoulder. He did not offer comfort she had not asked for. Clara stared at the bridle. "Did you ever meet my brother?" "No." "Did your father?" Luke's jaw shifted. He looked toward the darkening yard. That silence was answer enough. Later, long after the lamps had been lowered, Clara returned to the tack room with a candle and the older survey map. She noticed scratches around one floorboard beneath a stack of worn saddle blankets. The board lifted easily. Under it sat a small iron box. Dust covered the lid, except around 2 letters carved into the metal. D.H. Clara lowered herself to her knees. Her hand had just reached the lock when a voice came from behind her. "That box is not yours to open." Luke stood in the doorway. The candle flame bent between them. Clara kept one hand on the iron box. "You knew it was here." Luke crossed the tack room in 2 slow steps and lifted the box from beneath her fingers. He did not snatch it. He did not raise his voice. Somehow, that made the refusal harder. "My father put it there," he said. "When?" 2 years ago." Clara rose. "The same year Daniel died." Luke carried the box to the workbench but left it locked. "A wounded man came to Iron Creek during a storm. My father hid him in the hayloft. Before dawn, the man handed him this box, and said it belonged to someone carrying half a brass seal. Clara reached inside the lining of her coat. The piece she drew out was no larger than a silver dollar. A broken seal, cut clean through the center. Daniel had mailed it to her a week before his death without explanation. She placed it beside the box. The edges matched the mark scratched around the lock. Luke stared at it. Still, he did not open the lid. Clara's voice hardened. 17 families are being driven off their land while you protect a dead man's promise. My father protected a witness once, Luke said. Sheriff's men took him away before sunrise. He died in a territorial cell before anyone heard his side. That does not make silence honorable. No. Luke's eyes met hers. It makes me careful. The next morning they rode toward Coyote Ridge with the box wrapped in canvas beneath Luke's saddle. They would speak to Gideon Price first, compare his old water map with Clara's papers, then decide whether opening the box would help anyone or merely draw another gun. The town sat under a flat white sky. Horses stood tied before Ruth Calder's post office and eating house, their tails flicking at flies. When Luke stepped through the door, conversation thinned to the scrape of forks against tin plates. Gideon Price waited near the back window. He was an older black rancher with a straight back, silver at his temples, and a folded land patent tucked inside his coat. He spread his map beside Clara's. The old boundary followed 3 stone markers west of Twin Willow. The new survey moved the line nearly half a mile, enough to give Copper Crown control of the spring. A drunk at the counter glanced toward Luke. Careful, folks. Big Bennett's in town. Last man crossed him, never walked out. Luke's hand closed around the edge of the counter. The wood gave a low creak. He did not turn. Clara saw the tendons rise beneath his skin, then slowly ease. A man in a clean black coat entered from the street. Vernon Shaw removed his gloves 1 finger at a time. He looked more like a banker than the manager of the largest cattle company in the territory. Miss Hayes, he said, I was told Tucson sent someone capable. Clara folded the maps. Shaw placed a gold coin on the counter. There's a train east in 3 days. I can arrange passage. Denver needs educated clerks. Better pay. Better weather. And the families at Twin Willow? They will be compensated. For land they already own? His smile did not change. Clara set the coin on top of an unpaid breakfast receipt to keep it from curling in the breeze from the door. There. It finally has an honest use. She walked out. Luke followed without looking at Shaw. On the trail home, the sun dropped behind the red mesas. For nearly an hour, only saddle leather and hoofbeats broke the quiet. Then Luke spoke. The man who died in that saloon wasn't innocent. Clara waited. He caught Noah after the boy lost a mare. Beat him behind the stable. Noah was 10. Luke kept his eyes on the trail. I pulled the man away. He swung at me. I shoved him. He fell against the stove. You could have told the court. Noah's guardian would have taken him back. So you let the town believe you killed a man in anger. Luke's jaw tightened. The town's opinion was cheaper than the boy's safety. Clara looked at the scarred hand holding the reins. She had mistaken his silence for surrender. Sometimes it was sacrifice. They rounded the final ridge after dark. The horizon ahead burned orange. Luke stood in his stirrups. Iron Creek. The barn roof was on fire. They drove the horses hard down the slope. Earl lay near the main doors with a beam across his leg. Horses slammed against their stalls. The water tank beside the corral poured through a hole punched near its base. Noah's in the hayloft, Earl shouted. Luke lifted the beam and dragged him clear. Then he turned toward the flames. Clara caught his sleeve. The north service door. His eyes snapped to hers. I saw it on the ranch map. She cut through the fence line while Luke entered through the front. Horses burst into the open pasture, wild-eyed and steaming in the cold. Clara soaked a scarf in the last water left in a trough, tied it over her mouth, and crawled through the lower service door. Smoke pressed close to the floor. "Noah!" A weak cough came from behind stacked feed sacks. She found him pinned beneath a fallen ladder. Luke appeared through the smoke, shoulders black against the firelight. "Get out! Lift this!" A roof beam cracked above them. Luke braced beneath it with both arms. The weight drove one knee into the dirt, but he held. Clara pulled Noah free and shoved him toward the door. The beam shifted. "Luke! Move!" She dragged Noah through the opening. Luke followed a moment before the roof section collapsed behind him. Outside, a rider vanished beyond the south ridge. Luke saw him. His hand went toward the saddle of the nearest horse. Then Noah coughed and folded against Clara. Luke turned back. He dropped beside the boy and pressed a cloth to the cut above his brow. The rider escaped. Luke never looked after him again. Hours later, the barn was a black frame beneath a paling sky. Wet ash covered the yard. Earl slept inside with his legs splinted. Noah breathed evenly beneath two blankets. Luke sat alone near the ruined water tank. Ash coated his hands. His shoulders trembled once, then again. Clara came and lowered herself beside him, leaving a careful space between them. She placed Daniel's half-seal in his palm. "Open it with me." Luke closed his fingers around the brass. This time, he nodded. Near the tank, something reflected the dawn. Clara picked it from the mud. A silver belt clasp marked with the crest of the Coyote Ridge Sheriff's Office. Luke examined it. "Grant wears this pattern." Before either could speak, Ben Holloway called weakly from the porch. They hurried inside. The driver's face was pale, but his eyes were clear. "Grant hired me to bring you," he told Clara. "He warned me off the main road. Said someone was watching the station." Clara held up the clasp. "Then why was this at the fire?" Ben shook his head. "Someone at the sheriff's office changed my route using Grant's name. I thought the message came from him." Luke and Clara exchanged a look. The badge, the riders, the fire. The signs pointed toward Grant, but not cleanly enough. At the kitchen table, Luke set the iron box between them. Clara fitted Daniel's half-seal into the lock. It turned. Inside lay one scorched ledger page, a small key, and a folded letter written in Daniel's narrow hand. Clara opened it carefully. The first line was addressed to her. The last two were not. "The proof is beneath the church floor, where no cattleman kneels." Below it, Daniel had written, "Do not trust the man wearing the star nearest the door." Clara read the sentence twice. Luke stood across the table, one hand resting beside the open box. Dawn had not yet reached the windows. The kitchen lamp burned low, throwing a narrow band of light over Daniel's letter, the scorched ledger page, and the small iron key. "Grant's office has 3 deputies," Luke said, "and 1 sheriff. The nearest door could mean any of them." Clara folded the letter along its old crease. "Then we stop guessing." The federal water hearing was set for the following morning at Coyote Ridge's church. Harvey Collins, a land officer from Prescott, had arrived by stage with a leather case, 2 clean collars, and the tired look of a man accustomed to being lied to. Copper Crown had filled the town before noon. Vernon Shaw's hired men leaned against hitching rails. 2 carried rifles wrapped in saddle blankets and called themselves stock guards. A lawyer from Phoenix occupied Ruth Calder's best corner table, spreading documents over the red checkered cloth, while Ruth served him coffee without smiling. Clara spent the day moving quietly. Ruth gave her the post office register showing letters sent under false names. Gideon Price brought his original land patent, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with blue string. Ben signed a statement from his bed at Iron Creek. Owen Blake copied the sheriff's duty roster and slipped it beneath a flour sack behind Ruth's kitchen. Luke watched the door. He did not interrupt. Near dusk, Clara laid everything across Ruth's back counter. "The church," she said. "Daniel wrote beneath the floor where no cattleman kneels." "The altar rail," Gideon said. Luke looked toward the dark outline of the bell tower across the street. "I'll go before sunrise." Clara shook her head. "We go." At 4 the next morning, frost silvered the church steps. Luke forced no lock. The side door opened with the key from Daniel's box. Inside, the air smelled of pine boards, lamp oil, and old hymnals. Clara knelt below the pulpit while Luke lifted one loose plank. Beneath it sat a shallow wooden case. The lid came up easily. The case was empty. Only a clean rectangle remained in the dust where a ledger had rested. Someone had arrived first. Clara stood too quickly and struck her shoulder against the pulpit. "Who knew?" "You, me, Earl." Luke's face changed. They rode back to Iron Creek at a hard pace. Earl was gone. So was the sorrel gelding he usually rode. Clara found his blanket missing from the bunkhouse and the rear gate unlatched. He took it. Luke looked at the hoof prints leading east. "No. You do not know that. I know Earl. You knew your father too, and you still kept Daniel's box hidden." The words landed harder than she intended. Luke's eyes lifted to hers. "You look at men the way you look at deeds," he said. "Names, marks, signatures. One wrong line and the whole page is false. And you forgive anything if the man worked beside you long enough?" Neither spoke again on the ride into town. By 10 o'clock, every bench in the church was filled. Ranchers stood along the walls. Women crowded near the windows. The bell rope swayed faintly in the draft. Harvey Collins sat behind a table beneath the pulpit. Vernon Shaw occupied the front row. Sheriff Lewis Grant stood near the center aisle, his badge bright against his black vest. Frank Dyer held his usual place beside the rear door. Clara saw it. The star nearest the door. Before she could speak, Grant raised one hand. "Clara Hayes, you are under arrest." A murmur passed through the room. Grant read the charges from a folded sheet. Theft of private business records, forgery, incitement, suspicion of involvement in the Iron Creek fire. Luke stepped into the aisle. The room went silent. A man near the wall whispered, "Big Bennett's finally going to do it." Luke unbuckled his gun belt. He laid it on the floor. Then he moved no farther. "My name is Luke Bennett," he said. His voice was low, but the church carried it. He told them about Noah, about the stableman who had beaten a 10-year-old boy, about the shove, about the stove, about the lie he had allowed because the truth would have sent Noah back to a violent guardian. Then he spoke of his father, the arrest before sunrise, the cell, the death before trial. No one interrupted. Vernon Shaw smiled from the front pew. A fine speech from a brute pretending at decency. Luke looked at him. Nothing in his face moved. Clara stepped beside Harvey Collins's table. She opened Gideon's old map, then the altered survey. One line at a time, she showed the shifted boundary stones, the impossible signatures, the payments made to a dead account, and the pattern of fires on ranches that refused to sell. Shaw's lawyer objected. Harvey Collins ignored him. But without the missing ledger, the chain still broke in the middle. Shaw saw it too. "You have suspicions," he said. "Nothing more." The church doors opened. Earl Mason stumbled inside. His left eye was swollen. His coat was torn at the shoulder. Deputy Owen Blake followed with a ledger under one arm and Frank Dyer's revolver in the other hand. "I saw Dyer take it from beneath the church floor," Earl said. "Followed him past the wash. He did not ride alone." Every head turned toward the rear door. Frank Dyer reached for his gun. Owen shouted. Dyer fired first. Luke moved before the sound finished. He struck Dyer's wrist aside, drove him against the wall, and pinned him to the floor with one knee. The gun slid beneath a pew. Dyer laughed through clenched teeth. "Go on, Bennett. Show them what you are." Luke's hand tightened around his wrist, then stopped. He released him. Owen stepped forward and locked irons around Dyer's hands. For the first time, the people of Coyote Ridge saw Luke Bennett with every reason to hurt a man and choosing not to. Owen placed the ledger before Harvey Collins. Clara opened it. The payments were there. Routes changed. Witnesses followed. Ben's stagecoach marked for interception. Dyer's name appeared again and again. Shaw rose. "Burn it," he snapped to one of his men. "That book is the only thing holding this farce together." Clara looked at him. "No, it is not," she explained in a steady voice. One copy had gone to the federal land office. One to an attorney in Prescott. One list of payments had gone to a newspaper in Phoenix. Several pages were divided among people who did not know what the others carried. The satchel had never held the only proof. It had held enough to make frightened men move, enough to show who was watching, enough to lead her toward Daniel's killer. The room shifted. Vernon Shaw's confidence did not vanish. It narrowed. Harvey Collins turned another page. "The direct payments to Dyer," he said. "They came through an account authorized by Lewis Grant." All eyes moved to the sheriff. Grant removed his badge. He placed it on the table. "My wife was ill," he said. "The doctor in Tucson would not wait. I took their money. I gave them the road. I changed duty hours." Dyer twisted against Owen's grip. "He left Daniel to die." Grant's face went gray. "I left Daniel alive." Clara stepped closer. "Who killed him?" Grant looked toward Shaw. "I do not know." Vernon Shaw slid one hand into his coat pocket. Something silver flashed between his fingers. A pocket watch. The lid bore 2 engraved letters. D.H. Clara saw it. So did Shaw. He turned and ran through the side door. Luke moved after him. Clara caught his forearm. "Alive!" Luke looked down at her hand, then at her face. He gave one short nod. Together they followed Shaw into the hard white sunlight. Outside the church, Shaw was already in the saddle. He drove his heels into a chestnut horse and tore down the main street, scattering dust, chickens, and a stack of empty freight crates outside Ruth Calder's kitchen. Luke reached the hitching rail first. Owen came behind him, still holding Dyer's revolver. Gideon Price pushed through the church doors with his coat unbuttoned and his old rifle in hand. "Twin Willow," Clara said as she mounted. "He'll go for the boundary." Luke looked toward the south road. Copper Crown had men camped near the creek. If Shaw destroyed the old stone markers before Harvey Collins issued a federal hold, he could claim the disputed survey followed the only watercourse left. "You stay here," Luke said. Clara tightened the strap beneath her mare's belly. "You need someone who knows which stones matter." His mouth opened, then closed. He mounted without another word. They rode south through dry grass and scattered mesquite, following Shaw's dust toward the narrow cattle trail above Twin Willow. The ground fell away sharply on one side. Below, the creek flashed silver between cottonwoods, feeding the small ranches spread across the valley. Halfway down the ridge, Clara saw movement near the old cut bank. 2 wagons, powder crates, lengths of fuse running toward the sandstone wall. "They're not only moving the stream," she said. "That shelf will fall into the workers' camp." Canvas tents stood beneath the ridge where hired hands cooked, slept, and repaired harness. Most had no idea what Shaw intended. Clara pointed toward the lower trail. "I'll warn them." Luke caught her reins for only a second. Their eyes met. "Come back." It was not an order. Clara pulled the reins gently from his hand. "That is the plan." She rode downhill with Gideon while Luke and Owen continued along the ridge. Shaw waited beside the powder wagons with 2 armed men. He had removed his coat. Daniel's silver watch chain showed against his vest. "You should have stayed quiet, Bennett," Shaw called. This town was ready to believe the worst about you. Luke dismounted behind a fallen cottonwood. One of Shaw's men raised a rifle. Luke fired once. The bullet struck the metal cap box from the man's hand and sent it spinning into the dirt. No one was hit. The cattle in a nearby holding pen startled at the sound. Luke cut the gate rope with his knife. 20 nervous steers poured across the trail, forcing Shaw's second man to pull his horse aside. Owen moved in behind them and took the rifle from him before he regained his balance. Shaw backed toward the main fuse. "You're still the same animal," he said. "All it takes is one bad minute." Luke stood in the open now. His gun stayed low. "You've had years of bad minutes," he said. "You chose every one." Shaw reached for the firing handle. Luke did not charge him. He waited. Shaw stepped away from the shelter of the powder wagon to get a better grip. Luke's rope sailed through the air. The loop caught Shaw across the shoulders and pulled him hard into the dust, away from the fuse. At the bottom of the slope, Clara reached the workers' camp. "Move everyone east," she shouted. "Leave the tents." Some men stared at her. Then Gideon fired into the air and pointed toward the powder crates. They moved. Clara followed the fuse line with her eyes. One section divided behind a flat rock, leading not only toward the cut bank, but toward a second charge beneath the ridge. A spark appeared near the first crate. The fuse was burning. She ran back uphill. Luke saw her and shouted her name. Clara dropped beside the split line, cut one cord with her knife, and threw wet creek sand over another. The fire went out. Then a smaller blast cracked farther up the slope. Dust and loose stone rolled across the trail. The force threw Clara into a shallow wash. For several seconds, Luke heard nothing but settling rock. He left Shaw bound beneath Owen's guard and slid down the bank on one knee. "Clara!" He found her half covered in dust, one sleeve torn, blood running across her palm. Her fingers were wrapped around Daniel's pocket watch. She did not answer when he touched her shoulder. Luke dropped beside her. His hands, which could steady a frightened stallion and lift a broken wagon, shook so badly that he could not loosen the knot of her neck scarf. He bent close. "Hush now," he said, his voice rough. "You're safe with me." Clara's eyes opened. Her breath came shallow, but steady. She closed one hand around his wrist. "Then stop shaking." For one stunned moment, Luke only stared at her. A short laugh escaped him, broken at the edges. He lowered his head until his forehead touched hers. Above them, Owen hauled Shaw to his feet. Gideon checked the hillside. The workers moved clear of the loose rock, and Twin Willow continued through its old channel. Clara opened the watch. Inside the back cover, beneath the machinery, was a narrow strip of paper rolled around the hinge pin. Daniel's handwriting was cramped but clear. It named the date, the meeting place, Vernon Shaw. It stated that Grant had left Daniel alive, and that Shaw had ordered Frank Dyer to silence him afterward. Shaw stared at the paper. His face emptied. Clara folded it carefully. "You wanted this buried," she said. "You carried it in your pocket instead." Daniel must have slipped the note inside before Shaw took the watch from him. Shaw had never known. Owen tied Shaw's hands and put him on a spare horse. They brought him back alive, exactly as Clara had asked. In the weeks that followed, Copper Crown's water claim was suspended. Federal investigators took custody of the ledgers, the watch, and the altered surveys. Shaw and Dyer were sent to the territorial jail. Lewis Grant lost his badge and waited for trial on bribery and obstruction charges. The 17 families kept their land while the case moved forward. It was not a perfect victory. Nothing on the frontier ever was. But people who had refused to speak began arriving at Ruth's back room with receipts, burned fence posts, copied signatures, and names. Luke gave his testimony in public. The first time, his hands remained flat on his knees. The second time, he looked at the room. Clara never answered for him. She sat in the first row with a pencil behind one ear and Daniel's watch in her pocket. That was enough. One cool morning, she returned to Iron Creek to collect her belongings. A mare stood saddled near the porch. Food was tied behind the seat. A sealed envelope of travel money rested beside her gloves. Luke was beneath the wagon, tightening a wheel nut with a long iron wrench. Clara stopped beside the step. "You fixed it." The west wheel was pulling. "You packed my horse." He slid out and sat up. "Tucson needs you. Coyote Ridge may still be trouble. Is that what you want?" Luke looked at the bridle hanging from his hand. "I want you to go because you choose to, not stay because I pulled you from a canyon." Clara stood quietly. Then she lifted the food sack from the saddle and set it on the porch. Luke watched her. "I did not come here looking for a man to hide behind. I know. And I am not staying because you saved me." His eyes rose to hers. Clara stepped closer. "I am staying because when I told you where I needed you, you stood there. When I asked you not to kill, you stopped. When everyone else saw a woman carrying papers, you saw someone making a choice." Luke's fingers tightened around the bridle. "One day, Iron Creek may feel too small. Then do not make my world smaller," she said. "Build it with me." He stood. Even with his shoulders slightly bent, Clara had to tilt her head to meet his eyes. Luke did not reach for her. "May I?" Clara took hold of his shirt collar and pulled him down. She kissed him first. It was not a promise that nothing would go wrong. It was a promise that neither of them would face it alone. 1 year later, a painted sign hung beside Ruth Calder's post office. Clara Hayes, land records, contracts, and claims. Her fees were written plainly beneath it. The Twin Willow Ranchers had formed a water association. Gideon served as its first chairman. Iron Creek rebuilt its barn and took in 2 more boys to learn horses under Luke and Noah. Luke was still quiet, still tall enough to make every doorway look narrow. But when he entered Ruth's eating house, no one stopped talking. Noah called to him from the back table. Gideon pushed out a chair. Luke chose the seat nearest the door out of old habit. Clara placed her files beside his coffee and sat next to him. That night, wind moved through the cottonwoods at Iron Creek. Lamplight shone from the new room Luke had built for Clara's records. She woke from a dream with Daniel's name caught in her throat. Luke sat up beside her. He did not pull her close. He waited. Clara turned and held out her hand. Only then did he take it. "Hush now," Luke whispered. "You're safe with me." Clara placed her other hand over his heart. "And you're safe with me." Outside, the wind crossed the open range. Inside, neither one stood in front of the other. They sat side by side until the lamp went dark. Long after the last lantern in Coyote Ridge had gone out, the wind still wandered across the open range, carrying the same quiet that had once belonged only to Luke. It had not disappeared. It had simply learned to make room for another heartbeat. Some people spend their lives searching for someone strong enough to protect them. Others spend their lives trying to prove they never need protecting at all. Luke and Clara found something rarer. They found the courage to let another person stand beside them without taking away their freedom, their voice, or their dignity. Love did not erase Clara's grief, nor did it rewrite Luke's past. It gave both of them a place where old wounds no longer had to be carried alone. Perhaps that is what home has always meant on the frontier. Not walls built from timber, not land marked by fences, but the quiet certainty that when the hardest road appears, someone will still choose to walk it with you. If you had been standing where Clara stood, would you have stayed at Iron Creek or ridden back to Tucson? If this story stayed with you after the final lamp went out, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting ahead, Stories of quiet courage, hard choices, healing hearts, and the kind of love that grows one honest step at a time. Until then, thank you for spending this evening on the trail with us.